Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Elly Greaney and I'm the host of The Journey of a Women in Tech, which is a podcast that I've been running for over sort of 7-8 months now, about different inspiring women and their journeys into technology, their story, what motivated them, any words of wisdom and advice. So hopefully we can share that among the community. This is the first time that we've ever done a live webinar, so please do kind of excuse us. We're hopeful that we won't have any technical glitch, but we'll see how we get on today. So really pleased to be able to welcome Lauren. So Lauren Bevan is the head of healthcare at BJSS, who are a global technology consultancy. I've actually had the pleasure of working alongside BJSS on a number of talent projects for probably the past sort of 3-4 years now, but this is actually the first time me and Lauren have met. So hi Lauren.
Hello.
How are you doing today anyway? You okay?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Glad that the sun is shining, but obviously staying well indoors.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's a really nice day today. So hopefully we've sort of scheduled for an hour for the meeting. So we're going to have a really good discussion, work through a few sort of questions that I've got in place around Lauren, her story into technology, and then we'll finish the session with a live Q&A. So hopefully you should all be able to see the various different sections where you can chat and write some comments about the webinar, but also the Q&A function as well. So please do feel free to register some questions and then we'll work through them towards the end of today's webinar. So it'd be fantastic, Lauren, if we can start the podcast with a bit of, I guess, information about your current role and responsibilities, what you've been getting up to at BJSS, and I guess more recently, how the effect of COVID is playing a key role, key big decision on where your current role and what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, of course. And I say happy to take any Q&A at the end, so do keep asking questions as we go. So yeah, I started at BJSS last summer, so in July last year, so about sort of 7 or 8 months into the role, and what my role essentially is sitting over all of the sort of health and social care work that we do as a firm. So we've got probably about 250 to 270 people working on healthcare technology and social care tech projects at the moment across the UK and the US. So my job is to understand industry trends, to understand where the market is going, and to make sure that we give our clients the best possible service and make sure that we do a really good job. So
amazing.
That is, I say, a very big
7-8 months in, it's still very early days. It's
yeah.
still very new and exciting.
Yeah, and obviously we've been responding to COVID since it first kind of started to eke onto our shores probably in February time. So a lot of the work that we've been doing more recently, apart from some of the longer term projects that we've been continuing on with, has been helping the sector to respond to COVID, either by helping people to work more remotely or providing safe sort of digital solutions to people to make sure that they can self-manage their condition at home, or that healthcare professionals and patients can be able to sort of safely interact without physically needing to be in the same place. So it's taken it's a bit of a change. It's certainly a change of pace, not necessarily a change in direction, but we are working actively to help the NHS to respond to the sort of ever-changing requirements that COVID is putting on the sector.
So an extremely busy time for you. And before everyone came actually on the webinar, Lauren was telling me that she was working 34 days in a row, and you had a break this weekend for the first time in a long time. So that was well deserved.
Yeah, it was lovely. I'm glad that
so
the sun was shining.
Been keeping. Yeah, no, it was a good weekend to have off, to be honest. So it'd be brilliant then if you, you've got quite an interesting background. Obviously, you worked directly in healthcare and also you've worked for a number of really highly regarded consultancies as well. So can you tell everyone a little bit about your background, your education, and where you came from really to develop to where you are today?
Yeah, so I originally wanted to be clinical. So that was what my undergraduate was in. And I spent my sort of summers and weekends and stuff cleaning on hospital wards and doing other things to sort of pay my way through university. So I've always worked in various different healthcare settings doing what I needed to do. So it's always been a sector that I knew that I wanted to work in from a really young age.
Was that due to like family or anyone that you knew that worked in healthcare, or was it just something you've always been interested in?
Well, my dad was, he worked as a sort of maintenance manager at a hospital. So I'd always been in and around hospitals, you know, after school and stuff, going to wait for a lift home and other things. And I used to swim, and the sports centre was right on the other side of the hospital. So I used to go swimming practice and then go and sit in my dad's office and wait for a lift home because I was too tired / lazy to go to walk home myself. So I'd always been in hospitals. So I'd always kind of, it'd been a sort of area that I'd been really familiar in, and I'd done some work experience there, and had kind of decided that that's what I wanted to do. So, and that's why I was able to sort of work as a sort of ward cleaner in summers and weekends. So I kind of understood how they worked. I enjoyed being in there, and I just always wanted to help people. I've got a lot of public servants in my family, so teachers and police officers and other people who tend to work, you know, with the public or in kind of citizen facing roles. So that's something that I think that we'd all you know, been normal growing up. So I went off and trained and qualified, and I spent my first couple of years in clinical practice doing what you call rotations. So you kind of go through, spend 3 or 4 months in different departments until you work out what area you want to specialise in. And I did trauma and sort of acute medicine. So you go in, I did lots of stuff on major trauma, and in terms, so air ambulance, A&E, critical care, and ITU, which is obviously very prescient in a moment. But then there was lots of funding crises in the NHS, and all of the jobs that were kind of the one level above me were blocked. So you're kind of facing a prospect, and actually in those rotational years you're moved between different hospitals, so actually it's quite difficult to lay down any routes or to have any sort of sense of certainty, because you're on different on-call rotas, or you're potentially moved into different cities depending on your rotational loop. So it's quite disconcerting to face an interminable prospect of just continuing to do those sorts of things until such time that a role kind of gets magicked up. So I was always moaning about how I could probably do a better job of managing NHS finances than the people who were doing it at that time. So I decided to go and train as an accountant. So another grad scheme. So I joined PwC, the grad scheme, with absolutely no relevant skills or qualifications apart from an undergraduate degree. All of my A-levels had been in sciences and maths. So I joined with, you know, no business studies, no English, no accounting, nothing, knew nothing. And trained and spent a few years working there doing restructuring, insolvency, did Lehman's for a bit, which was weird and exciting. So really had a kind of sheep dip in lots of different ways around how business works, and also NHS finance, how things get contracted, how things get bought, and just understanding the sector from a different angle. Did that and then went back into the NHS for another couple of years, which is how I picked up IT. So in the NHS, it's a great tradition of directors and deputy directors of finance to have IT in their portfolio. So I was a deputy director of finance and IT. So
amazing.
Yeah.
So that was, so it kind of fell in on you then.
Yeah, and there's two kind of types of directors of finance in the NHS. You have those that go, I'm going to hire a really competent head of IT, so actually I don't really need to deal with this, and I know that it's in really safe hands, and I'll focus on the finance side of things and on the contracting side of things. Or I can go deep and understand a little bit more about what all of these guys do. So obviously I did the latter and decided to learn more about technology and about how it worked and how it worked in a sort of clinical and operational setting. And that was in sort of 10 or so years ago now that I did that. So I worked across in Bristol and worked across hospitals, care homes, all sorts of different settings, and was generally annoying at being a novice and asked lots and lots of questions, started to teach myself.
It sounds like that kind of background, you've kind of immersed yourself in all the different areas. So your experience now is so multifaceted because you've kind of you've taken up little bits within other areas, which is amazing. And that must be really helpful now.
It is helpful, and I think it's helpful to always see it from a different perspective, that I know how much you see if you're cleaning a ward. I know how much you see if you're, you know, working clinically, and the frustrations that you face. So I think it's also really helpful in having an element of empathy, and still remembering what it's like to be a beginner, because I've gone back to being a beginner at lots of different things, because I think it's really important to know that, and to feel comfortable in not being the expert at it. Like, I understand the sector, but there's certain things that in no way, shape or form I feel like I know in detail. But that's what got me into technology, and able to ask sort of searching questions and understand things. And I left the NHS to go back into consulting, because there were some sort of government reforms, and it meant the organisation that I was a part of was dissolved, and was combined with 3 other ones, into sort of a big amalgamous mass, and everybody else had been there for 25 years. So
Was your role redundant then, or did you
yeah,
leave?
because of well, they called it clustering. So they pulled a load of different entities together into one. And although ours was the biggest of the 3, the other 2 people that held my positions had, as I said, been in those positions for 25 years. So they were a lot more established, and they understood a lot more about what was going on. So I went back into consulting, and I joined EY at that point. So that would have been 8 or so years ago. And worked in loads of different interesting roles at EY, and ended up being the head of health data and digital for UK and Ireland. So that was the position I left to come to BJSS. So again, lots of varied, weird and wonderful experiences there, and doing a whole host of different things. So it was...
How are you finding, obviously, the American piece? Because that's obviously a new addition to your current role then at BJSS.
Yeah, I did quite a lot of international work at EY, so I did quite a lot of work in the Middle East, in Australia, and in America, predominantly because there's a lot of cross-border learning in terms of the way that the NHS does things. So other people want to know how it works in the NHS, and to take learning from that. And I did a master's in health data science for public health through Johns Hopkins University in the States. So again, that's particularly prescient at the moment, in ways I wish it wasn't. But it's so I've got, you know, working in the health system in the States is a different kettle of fish completely, but it also makes me really grateful for the NHS in terms of seeing how things work over there, that I'm incredibly grateful to be part of a system that doesn't matter how much I earn, to make sure that I get good care.
Yeah, of course. And how much of your time now then is spent managing the American piece in the UK? Obviously you're managing across the whole area.
We've got 2 offices over in the States, so 1 in New York and 1 in Houston, and 10 in the UK. So it's probably split roughly on those lines, to be honest, in terms of proportionate split of work. And of the 30 projects we've got live, there's 2 in the States and 28 in the UK at the moment. So largely focused in the UK.
Amazing. So your background then is quite unique. I mean, I've been doing this podcast for quite a long time. I've spoken to many different people with varied backgrounds, but your background, yeah, definitely I would say is unique. But it's really interesting to hear how, like you say, that you've gone back to square one so many times and started again, which is really inspiring, because obviously that's really daunting for a lot of people that want to take a sort of career change. And obviously it's something that's really a focus for women in tech, and introducing people from different backgrounds into technology. But what sort of challenges do you think you face then as a woman moving into tech?
So I think there's something about expectation. So there's definitely something in terms of when you've got a mastery of a certain concept, having, it's not about humility. I think it's about not being frustrated with yourself. So I think there's a personal challenge of not expecting the same quality and standard of output of yourself in something that you are a novice in versus something you've been doing for a long time. And I think that's the key to not beating yourself up from going back to basics. So there's that. And I think there is something about you can see I'm wearing like a leather headband, I've got a nose ring, I tend to wear bright lipstick, so also I don't look like somebody that A, is an accountant, B, would have been by somebody's bedside, or C, knows how data works. So there is something about kind of bucking a bit of a trend in terms of the personality that people expect you to be. And I've had lots of people refer to male colleagues and asking, you know, whether or not, you know, they're the leader. People don't expect me to be the person that's in charge in meetings. And I think it's about not being angry at them, because I used to be quite prickly about it. And I think it's just about accepting and not agreeing with it, but that's what people will come into certain conversations with preconceptions, and you have to be comfortable and confident in being able to sort of turn around people's preconceptions of you.
And being able to educate them.
Yeah, exactly that. And you're never going to win everybody over. It's never the way that you're going to do that. But I think it's about making sure that you do a good job and don't allow that to put you off your stride, because again, it used to be something that used to make me flustered. I used to feel like a job interview every single time. But I think that most people actually these days don't want to be that close-minded. They just have not come across someone who looks and sounds like me. And like you say, I've got a really weird background. You know, I used to get it when I was in finance that people would say, well, you'd never know. And I said, we used to run an A&E, so in fact I do know. And people say that.
But I think it's definitely about educating people, isn't it, for the future, for the next person with a different background that comes into the role, so they're prepared to kind of be open to anyone, to expecting anyone. Because like you say, it's just educating, isn't it? People.
And it's doing it in a non-patronising way. And I think it's that thing of also luckily look relatively young, so people also don't think that you've had the amount of lived experience that you have. So I think it's about being able to be really clear and not oversell what you do, but making sure that people have a view about how you can help other people and how that you understand that you're on their side as well. Like, I got all the different and varied experiences because I was always thinking, okay, actually the NHS working and the NHS being the best system that it can be is the thing that I've always wanted to do. And I've always felt like I could do that by adopting different roles and learning different things in order to do the job the best that I could. You know, I got into technology because I think it's where the NHS needs the most help at the moment. I got into finance because I thought that people were ignoring the clinical challenges that ripping money out of the NHS face. You know, I've always had that sort of central question or that central driving force. I've just come at it with different things. Like, the more tools you've got in your toolbox, the better the end result, I think.
Definitely, 100% agree with that. What about the next generation then? What challenges do you think they'll face, and what can we do to help inspire the next generation and help give them a clear path, a direct route into technology?
So I think there's so much more in terms of online courses and things that you can do now. Like, I still do stuff. I'm trying to teach or learn JavaScript at the moment because
it's great.
How's
it going?
Debatable at the moment. I think it's just being so busy.
I'm sure it's probably on hold at the moment. You seem a bit busy, Lauren.
But again, it's that thing of I think if you can use online courses but give yourself a project that you really want to do through technology, then I think that's the best way to stay inspired and keep at something that feels really different. I really struggled when I started to learn accountancy because everybody else had got such a grounding in it that they'd done A-levels in it or they'd done an undergraduate degree in it, and I just sat there just not, you know, even the words debit and credit, I was like, oh God, no idea. And I think that but then I had the breakthrough by just repeating it and coming at it in different angles and just keep thinking about it. So I think there is something about being self-sufficient and teaching yourself in ways and using things that I wouldn't have had the chance to do when I started out. But then it's about thinking about how you can use that to pursue something that you're really passionate about. I think people are their best selves when they really believe in the purpose that they're working towards. And you can see really talented people working on projects and things that they're just not really that into, and you're never going to be the best version of you if you don't really have your heart and soul into something. So it's just about finding a purpose and a goal and an output to have something that you can really kind of, when it feels really difficult, you can keep going.
I think that's a really, really important and very true. I mean, obviously from a recruitment perspective, I speak to various people in various different industries, and the health and social care industries, it's quite specific that you find people, it is the work that they're doing, and we might be able to offer them something which on paper sounds a lot more exciting, and the opportunity in terms of monetary value, things like that. But I guess it's a passion of like love, isn't it? It's something that you really want to do and you really want to help, and which is definitely really exciting. A lot of people love that, and you must still get that buzz now, right?
Yeah, and I've always wanted to work out how I can, it's all about helping people living healthier lives and helping
Yeah.
people to connect to loved ones and all those other things. And there's different ways to go about doing that. But I think if you've got a central thing that you think, well, actually, this is what I feel really, really strongly and really passionate about, then it allows you to push through when things aren't ideal, when things go wrong. And they will. That's the thing. It's about having something that will see you through. Like everyone's got their own sort of Olympic torch or the little flame of things that they want to keep pursuing. And I think that if you find that, keep hold of it, because that will see you through changes and keeping learning and just keeping to challenge yourself, but not punish, don't be too hard on yourselves, because everyone struggles with stuff. I've got acres of stuff. You can't see the bookshelves behind me, but there's a whole pile of stuff that I really want to learn and really want to read that I've never got around to doing.
Yeah.
It sounds like I've done a lot, but there's still a lot more that I want to do. So again, no one's the finished product either. So don't judge yourself by other people's standards. Just you do you.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Like you say, there's definitely some real positives and you're carrying that flame to keep you moving forward. But I always think it's good to kind of reflect on the path that you've taken so far. So it'd be brilliant if you kind of shared your greatest achievement today.
Ooh, that's a really tough one. And I think it's probably not about something that I've done. I think it's probably, I've had some from emails from people who I'd kind of coached and mentored over the last kind of 10 years, who have gone on to do some amazing things. So every time I get like an email to say, oh, that job that I didn't really, I really wanted, like I've got it, or, I've been emboldened to take this move and I'm going and I'm basically doing what I really wanted to do, and people just
amazing
shove. So it's more to do with what other people have done because you've given them a bit of a pep talk. That's the stuff that I find sort of most inspirational, rather than shipping a product.
So you've mentored people before, and are they sort of industry specific, or have you veered away from that?
Just because of the way that I've worked, it has tended to be industry specific, but not always in technology. So tends to be people in health and social care, but people who've gone, into either service management roles or into sort of hospital leadership roles that that we would have had sort of coaching conversations about how they manage their career and what they choose to do next.
Okay. That's fantastic. And like you say, it's nice to be able to play a part, isn't it, in someone else and have your little input and help someone else on their journey, which is really important. What about you then? Have you had any amazing mentors, or who's been your greatest role model?
So I've had a couple, and actually there's some people who are younger than me as well. So there's some people that I look at and go, you're really bold, and actually you don't care. Like, you've got no preconceptions about what people think. You don't have all these sort of weird middle-aged hang-ups that I do. And I look at that and go, actually, I want to regroup some of that.
You're very fearless.
But that comes from other people. That is from other people. So in terms of
is that do you feel like that's your circle then? Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like finding your team as well that are able to encourage you and push you so you are fearless.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of like really good mates who have got the right measure of me, of when telling me when to shut up and go for it, or telling you, giving that level of gentle encouragement. So it's about I'm lucky that I've got friends who will indulge me when I'm having a bit of a moan about something, but would make sure that I don't have too much of a sort of sanguine moment, will sort of encourage me to get back up on my feet. So I think those guys are amazing to have round. And probably my granny. So my granny, so my family's Irish, and she came over, she's one of 13. So she came over was shipped over because their house burnt down and she was
Oh
sent
gosh.
away to go and earn some money. So she tipped up in England, started taking on all the jobs that she could, and had a huge family, of which my dad's one of them. So I think it's that whole thing of looking at someone who, say, was sending money back to support her 12 siblings back at the homeland, had her own family here, and she always frowned away. Like, I do not understand how they managed to do what they did, but she's someone that didn't have the best education, wasn't ever going to be able to live, you know, have the opportunities that I've been able to have, but always made sure that all the kids were fed and watered, that everybody was happy. And she was a real sort of force of nature. She was like 4'10" and my granddad was 6'7", and she absolutely ruled.
Wow.
Yeah, she was formidable. So
I've also got a very strong Irish granny, and I think she's very much the same. She came from nothing and worked really hard, and it is really inspiring to have someone like that in your family, isn't it? So
yeah, and both my grandmas are the same, similar stories of coming over at a similar age, you know, post-war, and just building a life. So I think that having that on both sides of the family sort of gives you a little bit of grit and determination, but also being really grateful for the opportunities that I do have and the education that I have been able to have, and not necessarily having to have the sort of typical gender roles that, you know, traditional Irish Catholic families gave their daughters.
yeah, and it must be hard, I guess, professionally as well, because you've kind of moved around into so many different. Like, is there any real role models that stand out for you in the industry? I don't know, the healthcare specific or.
Yeah, so there's Beverly Bryant, who is now CIO at King's, who is awesome. So she's sort of not necessarily bounced around, but she's been a big figure in healthcare IT for a long time, but has done roles at like a national level. And again, has been one of the only women in the room of predominantly male colleagues, but has done vendor work. She's worked at national bodies, now she's working at trusts, and she's taken on the really hard jobs. So I really admire her, because she's not taken an easy route. She's sort of really proved herself time and time again, and she's a really nice person, and she gives back as well. Like, she's really good.
So you've met her then? You've had the
pleasure.
Yeah.
She was someone that when I was first starting out, you'd kind of see on like on the news, and you know, she's someone that you sort of push your nose up against the shop window to go, oh, she looks really cool. And then I met her. Really, really nice, and she's really fun, and you can have a glass of wine with it and talk, and she'll just be really open and honest about, you know, things that aren't going to change. I think she's really pragmatic about where there are some inequalities that still exist, but where actually that's just the way things are, and you kind of need to suck it up and actually work with what you've got, rather than trying to change the world or expecting the world to change around you. So I just think she's good in that she acknowledges the challenge, but, you know, will say, well, the only way to do it is to just be really good at your job. So
I'm sure that's really relatable to a lot of people in tech, is that you've kind of, this is what you've got, and you've got to make the best out of your situation or your budget, etc. But particularly within healthcare, right? That's so important.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's about living within your means. But again, there's been a lot of kind of national debate around whether or not there should be a mandated minimum level of spend in the NHS for NHS organisations. And there's been a lot of pushback from really good CIOs that have said, well, actually, it's not what you spend, it's how you spend it. And we've achieved really good outcomes with actually spending a lot less than our peers. So I think there is something about cutting your cloth, but I think it's about understanding what you want to achieve and making sure that you're doing that in a sensible, pragmatic way. As we always say, the NHS isn't a charity. Despite all the valiant fundraising efforts that's going on at the moment, then
I know, good old, is it Captain Tom?
Absolute legend. But
I love him.
That's not the way it should be funded, in my opinion. Like, I just think we have to be really realistic about what the NHS can and should be expected to do. And it's a really hard system to work in, because you've got 230 NHS trusts, about 210 CCGs, 7,000 GP practices, and about 40 arm's length bodies. That's a hard ecosystem to manage, and you're going to have so many different varied requirements in that doing the right thing by one isn't necessarily going to be the right thing for another. So it's a hard, you know, you'll dash your ship against a few rocks if you try and take that approach of pleasing everybody.
Of course, yeah, definitely. I think before we kind of delve into that piece, because I know a lot of people want to find out more about what's going on, particularly at the moment within health tech and COVID. So if anyone's got any questions, now might be quite a good time to submit them, because we've got a couple more questions to work through with Lauren. But if you've got any specific questions you want to ask, just put them down in the Q&A box at the bottom, because we'll probably be moving on to that section within sort of 5 minutes. I thought I'd just let people know if you've got any questions. Please do write them down. No questions silly, please do ask. What about then, like, words of wisdom? Like, what do you wish you knew when you were younger, and what would you tell your younger self if you could go back in time?
So I probably would have done tech earlier, or at least been less afraid of it. So I got to it. Yeah, I got to it through data. So I'd always been interested in information, and at least from a clinical perspective, around understanding whether or not something works or not, around being able to read research papers and understand sort of trial efficacy and sort of confounding variables, and trying to do the best for my patients. So I'd always looked at stats and tried to get my head around that. But I left it relatively late to take that into the step, and we're actually doing code. But I guess it was, I wanted to do it, but I was scared of being shit, basically. And then I think that's what I would have said, is giving myself a bit more permission to be a bit crap. And actually, if you keep stuff to yourself and you're only judging yourself against your own yardstick, then I think that makes it a little bit easier on yourself to be, to have a bit more freedom and freedom to make mistakes. So I think probably would have given myself a bit more permission to falter and make mistakes. And then I think that, you know, particularly in consultancy, you're under a lot of pressure a lot of time to know the right answer, and sometimes you have to step back a little bit more and just kind of look and think, well, actually, do I really have all the skills that I need in order to do this and to do this question justice? And I think it's continuing to ask those sort of searching questions. And you don't have to know it all. You really don't.
And I can imagine that must have been really tough, because, like you say, when you first moved into tech, you didn't take your typical grad, dev, support, apprenticeship route. You were very senior within the NHS already by that point. So you must have felt that pressure, like you say, where you kind of want to pretend that you kind of know, but you clearly don't. But then, like, the imposter syndrome must have been 10 times worse at that level than it is when you're coming in at a junior position.
Yeah, and I went and shadowed people. So I went and sat, and I said, well, can I come and sit in the call centre for a bit? And I went and sat in an ambulance control room, and I went and sat in different places and just sort of buddied up with someone and said, you know, just tried to understand what it was that they did, how it was difficult, how in the position that I was in, I could make things a little bit better for them. And I think it was that thing of trying to understand that I wasn't trying to do it to performance manage anyone. It was genuinely meant to try and understand actually what it was that they did and how it was difficult. And I think that's a really important thing to do, is that although I sort of sit across a big team now, then and I don't profess to understand what everybody who's working to me, all the different languages that they can code in and all the different technical challenges that they face. I just have to take responsibility for making sure that they feel supported, that they don't feel like they're put into situations that they can't manage, and they don't feel like they're asked to solve problems that they can't. And I think that's about understanding what it is that, from a leadership perspective, it's not about knowing all the answers. It's about making sure that people know to ask you the questions. It's about keeping an honest and open dialogue with people, and having people feel that it's okay to say that they don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think a lot of people will put through some questions shortly, I'm sure, about sort of COVID and that piece. But what do you really see as the future of health tech?
So I think there's a couple of different facets of it. I think that there'll be an increase in people who want to use technology to self-manage their conditions. So people are getting more and more long-term conditions, and people less and less want to go and see a doctor about it. They want to sort of feel masters of their own destiny, which I think is great. So I think that will come into its own even more so. I think there's going to be a necessary shift in the way that care homes are involved in the whole sort of health tech spectrum. They've been quite underfunded, under-resourced and kind of ignored. Someone called Matt Hancock the other day, the Secretary of State for Health and the other thing. And I think that's quite accurate in terms of the way that national policy has treated social care and care homes. And I think that this whole crisis will have brought the importance of that at the fore. It's a much more fragmented market, and the technical skills of people who work in those areas are really low paid workers, although they do a fantastically valuable job, and there's really high turnover of staff. And I think that makes it very hard to do a digital change program because you don't have consistency of stakeholders. So I think that's something that's going to come out of this, and hopefully would get accelerated and a bit more focus on it. It's not the sexy tech stuff. So I think it's largely been neglected by tech bros who would rather think about, massive AI powered algorithms than how to help Nana do her shopping. But it's important. And the final...
And it takes big things like this for people to realise that as well, doesn't it, I think? And hopefully we will see a rise of startups that are interested in investing and putting some work in those areas, because it's just so important to everyone. So hopefully we've got to think of positives that might come out of something like this, and hopefully that will be one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also that understanding of how the system fits together, that I think this is showing some of the long-standing dysfunctions of a system, which I love dearly, and I would never want to work in another one, but it's not perfect. And I think there are things that we could do better. And a lot of it is about collaboration. So with people, moving into Nightingale hospitals or being severely ill and not necessarily being able to be in their local hospital, the transfer of information on patient care from place to place is going to become more important now than ever. And I think if we can use this as a springboard to have some more sensible conversations about information sharing and making sure that people have the right information to do their job, I think the more the better.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you said about something there about the personal piece and the impact on the workers themselves and the staff turnover and that kind of thing. But you before, I think it was before we went on the webinar, so perhaps people don't know, but you were saying that a lot of your sort of friends, your circle, your inner circle, a lot of them work within healthcare still, and it must be really tough, I think, from your role working so closely with people that are really in the thick of it. How are you finding that, and how are you trying to support your clients and your colleagues in the thick of it at the moment?
Yeah, I think because I'd done quite a lot of work on what's known as Silver Command on swine flu back in 2009, then I've an understanding about how these sorts of things swing into action in terms of the pandemic. So a lot of my friends still are clinical or are trying to do policy work on things at the moment. So it is about understanding the use cases. So I think at the moment people are just chucking tech at stuff and hoping that it's useful, because you can't readily get access to people who are in the front line to get, use cases that are really sort of functionally useful. So I'm resisting the urge to throw people at problems that we don't fully understand. And to work on the things that we do know would make an impact, and to push more people behind those, because I think that that's the way we will get more a decent output, rather than a sort of smorgasbord of half-finished proof of concepts that might be tangentially useful, but we don't really know. And yeah, it is really hard because my clinical qualifications lapsed so long ago. I'm not eligible to go back into that sort of frontline work. I would do more damage than good and ask a lot of questions. I can't intubate anymore. So I wouldn't be much use in terms of those clinical workforce, but I think it's about understanding what we can do from a mental health perspective, how we can stop the staff from burning out, and also to give an element of support, because people will have been thrust into roles that they're not used to being in. And I think it's about making sure that we can use responsible tech to provide support for those people when they step away from it, because, there's a lot of suggestions around how it will be similar to sort of veterans and, seeing really difficult stuff. And I think I have got half an eye on how we can help with the aftermath in terms of using technology to help people to feel connected, and how to feel connected to their loved ones in a time where everybody obviously has to be socially distant.
Yeah, of course. Brilliant. So hopefully then I'll click to click to more of the questions then and see what we've got. I have got one question that was emailed to me before. So we've got a question from John Cockburn. So hopefully John's with us today. He wanted to know how you believe coronavirus will affect the digital sector, and in turn, how this will affect the people working within tech.
So I think it's going to impact the digital sector in terms of, a lot of people have joked and said that their 5-year plans have been delivered in 3 weeks. So I think it's sort of pushed on in terms of a lot of the change that were on people's to-do list has been accelerated and delivered in such a short period of time. And there's going to need to be a reflection on it when things start to fall down into the more subacute phase of this pandemic, to understand, okay, so what's next? So that's like really specific into health tech. But I think in terms of technology, obviously people have had to do remote working and have had to spring up solutions to make sure that they can be safe and secure and also sort of productive from home. So I think there's been a real challenge around and flexible working as well. So, I was joking with a friend and saying, from a healthcare perspective, all of these people that have been joked about being part-timers actually have all been able to ramp up from 3 to 5 days a week, and actually have been a hugely flexible workforce who know the job and are able to do those things very quickly. So I think it's also about being open-minded about people who have got different abilities and physical disabilities and other things. I'm hoping that there'll be a lasting change for people that haven't been able to access traditional workplace 9 to 5, Monday to Friday models where they have to go sit in an office all day and haven't been able to participate, and an acknowledgement that you don't need to be in those traditional work hours and that traditional working pattern to be able to be helpful. So I'm hoping that economic will change and shift a bit, and people will be a bit more okay with working differently.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully. I think everyone's hopeful for that. Okay, so we've got a message from Sarah Moorhead. Hi, I've been in the NHS IT world for the last 19 years, both national and local, and recently left the NHS to go to a healthcare supplier. How do you see the relationship between the NHS and supplier changing after COVID? I see this being much more collaborative.
I hope that it's going to be more collaborative, but I think it is on healthcare suppliers to make sure that they're being ethical and above board in this time of crisis. So I have heard wind of a few people that are trying to sell over the odds in terms of list price to the NHS because they know they need their solution. And I think that is something that's utterly unacceptable. And I think as an industry, we should be calling that out and making sure that people know that that's not the way that we work. And I think that the people that I've come across who have got, the most amount of empathy for the NHS and all its foibles around slow procurement processes and it being sort of slightly difficult to transact with, I think that people are seeing a lot of that being swept away at the moment. So I'm hoping that people can come to more of a shared understanding and be more collaborative, and that it's less kind of adversarial where people think one's trying to get the one over on the other. That actually we're on the same side on this, and I do hope that stays, but I think that is dependent on suppliers behaving in a way that is ethical and above board. So we've got to make sure that we're playing it right to make sure that we give people the trust that they need.
And if ever there's a time to kind of prove that, now is the time, isn't it? So I think
and I don't think it's a difficult thing to do. I think it's just about not being a dick about it and being really accepting that people are going to have other things on the plate other than the meeting that you want to have with them. But as long as you're being seen to be safe and helpful, then I'm hoping that continues as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, perfect. We've got a question from Beth Marshall. What are the future opportunities in terms of tech and skills which may emerge, which women looking to get into healthcare and tech might want to look into now? So what sort of tech and skills are going to emerge that people can start looking into now?
So I think there's a load of stuff around things like unified comms. So being able to share secure messaging between patients and their families, obviously when they're isolated, and also between healthcare professionals. So I think there is a huge amount that can be done from a comms, unified comms perspective. Also seeing a big likely surge in terms of kind of interoperability, because I think there's going to be a load of point solutions that have been raised through people, just getting products out there and doing really specific things that will need to be joined together in a way that works more long term. And then thirdly, I think that there's going to be a real kind of upsurge in that sort of care home tech. So user experience and service design specialties that sort of work with people who have got different needs, who are potentially elderly, people with dementia, and also lower skilled, lower paid carers, to make sure that we're designing for those groups in mind a lot more than we have done previously.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Well, hopefully Betty got a few tips there. Damon Tyler, would be better to have an aligned integrated system within urgent care and primary care in regards to more accurate codings.
Yeah, so I think coding's a funny one. So clinical coding is a qualification in and of itself. So I agree that there should be one kind of singular unified data dictionary, but I think it also comes down to training. So I've seen a lot of variation in the way that these sorts of things get coded up, which are to do with there not being proper training for people, that they kind of, you sort of do see one, do one, teach one, and that means that people then work out their own weird and wonderful ways of doing things, which makes absolute sense to them, and then when you pull it all together, it makes absolutely no sense on a national level. So yeah, I agree, but I think that has to be led at a national level to make sure that everybody's on board with it. And I think there were some conversations about doing that, which have largely obviously been parked for the moment.
Yeah, it definitely parked for the moment. I think a lot of things will be.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Has anyone got any more questions they want to submit? So we've sort of got 13 minutes. Oh, perfect. We've got one from Rosie on the chat. There we go. Rosie said, how do you see the healthcare industry giving people more control over their healthcare data? And do you see social and healthcare data linking up more closely at a national level to achieve this?
So I think on the first question, in terms of giving people more control of their data, so on the NHS app, you can get your summary care record and you can get your detailed care record. So those sorts of things are starting to be facilitated at a national level. It is dependent on your GP practice giving you links to that and letting you have a look at that, because I think they were starting to see these things called subject access requests, where you could ask,
for any data.
Hold on me. Yeah, exactly. So I think people are wanting to empower people. There was a program called Empower the Person at NHS Digital that was focused on doing exactly that and giving people the keys to their own health. I think that it's about a shift in wider medical model in terms of it's quite paternalistic. So there was always the worry that you should abbreviate stuff in medical notes that you didn't want patients to know, which is why you get some very odd things that are in notes, because people felt that people couldn't handle the messages around their health and around their well-being. And I think that we're starting to change that from a societal perspective around people having access to it all. So I think it's coming, but I think it needs a change on a wider medical model around it being less sort of medical and paternalistic and allowing people to understand actually what's going on with their bodies.
Yeah, definitely.
On the Health and Social Care Board level, I agree, and I think that we're seeing this in terms of the way that the COVID stats are being reported at a national level, in terms of care homes being largely excluded from that. And I think the public push to say that that's not acceptable and it's not accurate has forced the change in stats. So I think that the data and the systems have been largely underfunded. So whilst I'd like to say I think that will happen, I think it's contingent on government providing care home suppliers, because they run on razor thin margins as it is, to be able to give them the money in order to invest in the systems to be able to do that. They're largely done on massive spreadsheets at the moment, which doesn't give anybody much cause for thinking it's high quality data.
Okay, cool. Sandra's messaged in saying, when you said earlier about mentoring, what advice would you give the listeners about how to gain a mentor to be able to enhance their careers?
So I'm a member of One Health Tech, which is looking at advantaging sort of underprivileged people in tech, so based on sort of BME or women or sort of differently able, or just coming from a like humanities skill set. That they've got a mentor match service there, so I would encourage people either to list themselves as a mentor or to get involved there. And then I think,
what did you say? Sorry, what was that called, Lauren?
It's called One Health Tech.
Okay.
So they've got a mentor match scheme there,
Mm-hmm.
so you can register on either side of the fence. They're always lucky to have you, and they do a good job at matching people up. I think the other thing that I would say is don't be afraid to ask people. I would always say, if you've got a really good connection with someone that you know and you really admire them, then I would say just ask them. If you can, doesn't necessarily have to be a formal coaching or mentoring relationship, but just think about the people that you would want, who are the voices in your head when you've got a really difficult decision to make, and then try and see if you can pick up the phone to them. Like, most people are happy to help. Don't feel like it's a weird thing to approach someone to do it. The worst they can say is they don't have time. I don't think it would ever affect someone's relationship. So
Yeah,
if there's someone you want to ask, then ask.
definitely don't be afraid to ask. Also, I guess it's be interesting to tell the listeners, I guess, about the various events that you get involved in, because I think Karen mentioned to me before that you do a lot of sort of speaking at tech events. What do you get involved in the tech community?
So I would say a lot of it's through some of the stuff that One Health Tech does, and I think it's also about we've done things around learning from failure, and we've done things about, you know, how to get your tech career off the ground, and how to sort of bring ideas. So we've done stuff about how to get funding, you know, and other things. So we've done a sort of really wide range of events, and I would also encourage people to put suggestions forward, because we can never really know what people are struggling with until people tell us, and then we can kind of figure out someone that knows what they're talking about to go and talk about it. But we've done all sorts of stuff like data privacy, GDPR, and we've got lawyers, we've got user experience, service designers, technologists, all sorts of different people, and we generally try and get along and ask different searching questions of each other, and probably our own worst critics and best cheerleaders as well.
That sounds good. Perfect. Well, I think that's all the questions for today, which is probably quite nice timing. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so we've done okay there. So just so everyone is aware, there will be a recorded webinar today that will go on YouTube. I'm hoping to be able to put this on tonight, so we'll be able to share it with people or colleagues that weren't able to attend today. We will also, as it's part of the Journey of a Woman in Tech podcast, that is put on Spotify, Apple and Google, so you can just search for the Journey of a Woman in Tech as well. So the podcast will go live, and there's various other episodes that you can get tuned into. We spoke to people from all different industries, not just healthcare tech, so there's loads of different interesting conversations that you might be interested in going back on. But just want to say a massive thank you to Lauren. She's an extremely busy lady, guys, so she's taken time out of her schedule to come and sit with us for an hour at lunch. So thank you very much, Lauren, and best of luck with all your efforts at the moment, and to the team at BJSS and the NHS for all the great work that you're doing at the moment. So thank you very much, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, and just wishing everybody and their families a sort of safe journey over the next couple of weeks. Wash your hands, stay inside, stay safe.
Yeah, 100%. Are people able to connect with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is that the best way to stay in touch, or Twitter?
Yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter, either or, but just drop me a note. And if anyone wants to find out more about any of the work that we're doing, or any of the stuff that we're doing on One Health Tech, then do drop me a note. And thank you all for listening and for spending your lunchtime with me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. So we will be posting all of the information on the Transition Partners website, so feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to connect with me and keep in touch about all the other great webinars we've got in play over the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much, everyone. See you later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.